as a fast-growing startup, effective leaders need to keep firing themselves from the job that they did at the beginning. So I think that always has to happen. And I think you got to be pretty reflective on a regular basis to make sure that you're, again, obsessing over the right things, right? So it's important to me to have connectivity to the business and every individual to understand like how they are experiencing that. It gives me all sorts of data points to understand, like, are we doing the right things in trying to scale?
Hey there, dental economist. If you're a dentist owner or a leader within a dental business thinking about growing production, case acceptance, patient and staff satisfaction, positive outcomes, and everything else that comes with running a dental business, then you're a dental economist, and you've come to the right place. Welcome to the Dental Economist Show. We're meeting at the intersection of profit and purpose as I sit down with dental leaders who share their stories about dentistry, business, and growth. Welcome back to the Dental Economist Show with me, Mike Huffaker. Today, we're thrilled to welcome a remarkable leader in the dental industry, Rezwan Manji. Rezwan is the CEO and co-founder of Imagen Dental Partners, a dental partnership organization that's helping high-performing practices grow through strategic partnership and innovation. With over 15 years of experience, Rezwan has been instrumental in transforming the business side of dentistry, providing growth-focused support for practices while prioritizing patient care. Before founding Imagen, Rezwan played a pivotal role at Spear Education, where he led the development of one of the most respected clinical education platforms in the industry, growing its membership to over 16,000 and launching Spear Practice Solutions, a technology-driven consulting service for dental practices. Rezwan, excited to have you on the show today. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing awesome. Appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to get to some of the founding story in a little bit, but I want to jump just kind of right into the business of things here. I think a lot of people are familiar with Imagen now. You guys have definitely made a name for yourself over the last few years. Before we started recording, I was telling you that I was listening to an old interview from you, just old, 3 years ago, where you talked about having 10 practices. And recently saw the notification on LinkedIn that you've surpassed 100 affiliated practices within your partnership organization. It's incredibly fast growth. We don't see that happening very often. And especially, I think, with the backdrop of the high interest rates and kind of what has been taking place from a macroeconomic perspective over the past 4 years with generally a decrease in M&A. So my first question is, what do you attribute to the growth being so quick? And as you look at kind of what you've achieved in such a short period of time, is there something that was easier than you expected it to be? And is there anything that was definitely more difficult than you expected it to be?
I attribute a lot of the growth, most of the growth, the whole thing, frankly, to the incredible team that we put together. I mean, I think at the end of the day, ideas are easy, execution is what's expensive. But we managed to put together a pretty phenomenal team that has been able to take a vision and make it a reality, right? So I think when you grow at that pace, there's a lot of things that are hard, right? There's nothing easy about creating something special. That's for sure. I mean, especially in this space. But every day you're the biggest company that you've ever been, and you run into new challenges. And so you always have to reinvent yourself on a regular basis and make sure, that you don't pick up any bad habits on the way and that you're thinking about the future and scaling for growth. Whether that be how you're thinking about your data infrastructure, whether that be how you're thinking about how you engage your practices, scaling growth plans at their individual store level. For us, it started with a plan on a piece of paper and a few decks. And as we actually started in business, you learn stuff when you operate, like a lot of your hypotheses are wrong. And so our ability to pivot and have these smart individuals that we've surrounded ourselves with, at the end of the day, like we just done a good job staying focused and execution oriented and just trying to do the right thing, like fail fast, make some thoughtful mistakes and try to seize the day. That's really what it's been about.
I really like the notion of, every day the business is bigger than it has ever been before. Something that we talk about at Planet DDS sometimes. Also in the context of fulfilling a role within that organization. And, I go, gosh, I've never been the CRO of an organization this as large as it is today. So it's always new. It's always like discovery of what's next and kind of redefining skills. As you look at your role as CEO of Imagen, how has that kind of evolved over the past 3-4 years? And if you think of, today and moving forward, what are the couple things that you just think of that like, I just have to get these things right?
Yeah, I mean, I think broadly, like you got to obsess over the right things. Like day one, like I created the email addresses and for the company, I'm the IT guy, I'm the project manager, all that kind of stuff. And I was thinking about a quote actually as you were asking that question. It was it's something along the lines of, as a fast growing startup, effective leaders need to keep hiring themselves from the job they did at the beginning, right? So I think that always has to happen. And I think you got to be pretty reflective on a regular basis to, make sure that you're, again, obsessing over the right things, right? So it's important to me to have connectivity to the business and every individual to understand how they are experiencing Imagen. So it, gives me all sorts of, data points to understand, are we doing the right things and trying to scale? I think one of the more difficult things it's a little bit answering the question that you asked before, but for me, as you grow, you have sets of core values and a vision for how you want to operate. And it's really hard to kind of keep, those things true as you grow through different phases. So for me, as I'm going through this CEO experience, I'm still trying to learn how to be a CEO and hopefully a decent one at that. But I appreciate what others have to say, meaning I try to listen. I get, hundreds of data points on a regular basis and I try to listen. I'm never the guy that's going to, say the most words in a room. It's the people that are actually delivering for our practices that will have the best insights for me to make important decisions around how to execute, how to think strategically in the future, right? So it's just always constantly learning, right? You and I have talked a lot about podcasts and learning and reading, right? So that's something that I do a ton of too. So whether it be learning from my internal team and what they're experiencing, our partner practices, or just outside resources, those are the things I really want to do. So I can hopefully continue to be an effective leader.
Taking that approach of viewing it from a humble position of look, I'm always looking to grow and improve. I see that in a lot of the best CEOs. You would think that there would be this maybe arrogance or something about, hey, look how much I've achieved, but it actually ends up being quite the opposite. It's always hey, I need to continue to progress in order to support the organization that I have. You mentioned something earlier in our conversation, and I actually had it called out as a question I wanted to talk to you about. But in all the interactions that I've had with members and individuals of your organization, it's really clear that you place a very huge emphasis on human capital and that you're relentlessly adding qualified, motivated, talented individuals to your team. Did you realize kind of from day one that needed to be a focus? And do you have any kind of advice that you could share with others as to, how you go about achieving bringing on individuals that are just such great fits for what you're looking to do?
Yeah, I placed a massive emphasis on quality talent from day one. I think our third hire was our head of people. And that was really to do two things: to one, set the tone from a cultural perspective day one, and two, hopefully attract the best in the space. So, the hiring process, for example, is I take it super seriously, and it's a consistent framework and frankly, a two-way process that exists. And I think we approach that process in a pretty systematic way. It's based off of a couple of things. One, there's a company called GH Smart, they do executive coaching and recruiting. They have a book called Who. I've used that for years.
What's the name of the book?
Who, WHO, by Randy Street and Jeff Smart. And then, we use personality profiles. We map our entire organization to target exactly what we're looking for in each role. So the amount of work that goes into process before we even talk to an individual to flesh out exactly what we're looking for, it's actually quite high. And then the interview process itself, very purposeful, the types of questions that we ask. I go, for example, through someone's very first job from the beginning of their career. And I ask them the exact same questions throughout each of their roles, right? So what were you specifically hired to do? What were your top two accomplishments? What were your top two failures and what did you learn? I don't really care about the specific answers, to tell you the truth. If I ask you for two things and you say 10 things, it tells me a little bit how you think. If you're talking about failures and you're passing the buck and not taking the ownership and not telling me what you learned, it really tells me, the type of individual that you're bringing. So pattern recognition throughout those questions through the career, it tells you a lot about those individuals. You pair that with measuring people through a very specific scorecard that we focus on, along with the personality profile, and you start to really hone in on the types of people that you want. For me, I consider myself a pretty execution-oriented leader. I don't want 8 strategists in a room, just talking about a bunch of ideas. So again, I said earlier, we map out our organization and really focus on a nice, well-balanced, group of strategists, executors, process people, whatever it may be, to make sure that we attract quality people.
I also, in the interview process, particularly like the people that have had no failures. Can't really think of one of those.
Those are pretty quick interviews if that's the case.
They should be. When you talk about the personality assessment, is there one specific that you guys are using? Is it DISC?
We use a predictive index, PI. And so in that process, the manager, actually a group of leaders in the company fill out a survey, and then each of the candidates fill it out. And it essentially gives you a combination of things from, a fit score, plus tells you the type of person they are, where their strengths and weaknesses are. It's actually pretty wild how close it gets. Like a friend of mine actually runs the company there, and over a couple cocktails when we're with a friend group, he'll make us fill out some of these surveys, and he'll just start like telling us about each other and getting into our deepest and darkest traits. And it's actually a lot of fun. But the system works, and when you pair that with kind of how we think about the interview process, it usually produces a good result.
No, that's great. That sounds very methodical. And now my experiences make a lot more sense for all the people that I've had in your organization. I'd be curious, when you think about culture itself, how would you describe the culture of Imagen? And, you did call out the difficulty in retaining a consistent culture over time and through growth. But can you talk a little bit about what it looks like and kind of how you protect it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different ways. Like, look, I don't think like any company is perfect when it comes to culture. And I think about culture as more of a process versus an event, right? Like, quick story, I'll diverge for a second. I'll answer the question. But like early in our company history, along with our chief people officer, like we went to go look at office space, and we were looking to go sublease a space. And this is like, right after COVID, when a lot of companies were giving up their space. And so we saw a lot of furnished spots, and on the walls, there was just like these buzzwords, right? Like integrity, trust, like whatever it may be. And like those companies, it didn't feel like they had any soul, right? So for us, like, we spent like 3 months developing our values, and we spent like months thinking about like what it was going to be like to work here. And so it started off with like that foundation that we were trying to build. We measure our team on the values, like on a quarterly basis in performance reviews. We try to recognize based on those values. We try to really walk the talk as it relates to that sort of stuff. But yeah, look down times where we've fallen, and we gotta make sure that we bring that heart back to the top of the pile, right? So I think the environment that you bring people in is really important. We want a group of team members that have a huge care factor. We want to make sure that we're serving and we're, listening to our employees. I think communication is massive when you're building a culture, right? Everyone inside of the business should know how we operate, who we are, what we do, how we do it, what we need to be good at, what the targets are. They should be able to recite the targets, frankly. And they should know how their role really plugs into what the outcomes and the objectives really are. And that's hard. Like, I don't think any business is good at it. So we're always trying to reset and change things up to try to make sure that we're driving communication really hard with business, right? I would also say that transparency is massive. Like I share every number with my team, right? Like there's no hiding. And I think people find that pretty refreshing, frankly. Like people that have been in other businesses and come here, they're like, wow, there's, a lot of transparency, right? So an example of I was talking about values a minute ago, like one example of one that I really like, it's like zero politics, no jerks allowed. And we live by that, right? It used to be something else in terms of the jerk part. We had to change it up a little bit. But, long story short, like, just to show an example of like how we've lived that before and how it's made a huge difference culturally. Like we've had partnerships that are, near done, and we're going to do a deal. Like we spent a lot of money on diligence and doing these things. And that particular prospect or prospective partner treats our team terribly. I've walked away from deals we have as a company because of that. And that shows the rigor and commitment to the value. And it shows a lot to the employee or team members that we don't take, a prospective doctor, even though it's a great deal for us, we won't take, treat one terribly. It's just not something that we're going to go do. So to us, it's about having a quality business with quality people that stand for a cause and stand for our values. And hopefully we lead by example on that front, right? But again, like it's always a learning experience.
I really like the process, not a moment. And in some cases, it's aspirational, but that's okay too. Like it's all right to set your sights on something that, maybe you're not achieving today, but that it's what you want to be. I appreciate that you're putting all of this in front of folks consistently too, because if it's like a one and done sort of thing, or even just a once every like 6 months or once a year at our all hands, we flash up our core company values. And when you're telling the story about the office spaces, Mike, those like, I can picture those photos. It's like a sunset and it says success or something. And then underneath it has like some generic statement. I've never asked anybody this, but I was kind of curious about it, thinking that as you were kind of talking through the culture and the transparency, And you have a partnership organization model. There's obviously the support networks that you provide to assist with the non-clinical functions of Imagen across all of its practices. Is it a challenge to keep connection from a culture perspective with the kind of corporate leadership, for lack of a better term? I know some people like to just call it the support organization, and the in-office teams and doctors and clinical teams. Almost feels like there can become a different focus. And it can maybe, and I'm just speculating here because I don't actually know because I haven't asked anybody, but where it could feel like there's almost like two different teams within an organization versus like one aligned team.
Yeah, it's tricky, right? But at the end of the day, our doctors all own a huge chunk of their practices, and they built those things with blood, sweat, and tears. And we're not trying to change what they've already built, right? We're trying to help and be enablers. And so we don't go in and try to drive the Imagen culture through every single practice. We certainly want to help streamline a lot of the back office processes and whatnot, and change management and all that kind of stuff is difficult. And that can create some fun conversations or whatnot. But it does end up being tricky because a lot of our doctors and their teams have been successful by operating the way that they've designed their own culture to be, right? And so we're learning a lot there. Again, we do a lot of surveying. We visit the practices a lot and obviously connect with them on a regular basis. I think we do a pretty good job specifically with office managers, but it's one of those things where you almost have to be really careful about trying to change too much about the future of the practice when they already had a success model like that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Do you do any events where you bring all of the doctors together either on like an annual basis? And is there any like meeting cadence that you put in place within the organization?
We do a few things. Like we're literally just coming off around what we call quarterly roundtables. So between myself and a few other members of the C-suite, we go into the regions and we invite doctors to events and we do dinner. So we do some small regional stuff there. We do some clinical study clubs, both from a webinar standpoint and a physical standpoint as well. And then we also have a huge annual event that we do. We bring everybody out to Scottsdale and we do a couple days of almost shareholders meeting times clinical education meeting times a really fun time. So the energy is actually amazing when you get these folks together, right? We have one thing I think that has been amazing to watch is we got like-minded, economically aligned doctors that are a community, like getting into one room. And the power of that has been amazing. They learn off each other. They tell good stories, good food and beverage, and it just re-energizes everybody. And so we try to do a good job of that. We're continuously developing and redeveloping how we engage our doctors. I think we're okay at it right now, and we're going to keep doing that good job and iterating until we get that right. So, but so far, so good, but lots of community events, both in person and digitally.
I would imagine, anybody in any type of position, if they don't have a lot of peers where they're at in any given day, really like the opportunity to have time to have those conversations, make those connections, commiserate when necessary, share challenges, and be able to feel like you can do it with folks that are also walking in the same path that you're walking.
Yeah, that's exactly. And the same applies for office managers, hygienists, and teams too. Like we do twice a year, get our office managers together in person, best practice sharing, all that. And we've been able to generate a community, there as well, which has been awesome. But yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, with your background at Spear and, such a focus on education, and even in the interactions that I've had with you, I know that it's something that you value for yourself as well. How do you think about supporting continual education within your organization?
Yeah, it's a massive focus for us, right? So we believe that the combination of education and technology produce practice growth. And, I spent a good chunk of my career developing clinical education platforms and services that directly tied to the growth of a practice. The best way to grow practice is not by cutting a bunch of costs. It's by expanding clinically and, training and teaching, doctors and teams how to, create great patient outcomes. And so a huge focus on that. We are partners with Spear. We're developing a pretty, good size education platform and in-house as well. And we spent huge dollars in an investment in making sure that education is at the core of who we are.
And part of your affiliation model and your partnership model is that you are seeking offices where the clinical team, the clinicians, they're not looking to retire. Like they are planning on continuing to practice dentistry for quite some time post the partnership. I would imagine that some of the benefits to that are there's less turnover. It doesn't feel like the office is being taken over. You have consistency and quality of care that the patients are going to receive. Would you consider also partnering with doctors that are closer to retirement? Or is this really part of kind of thesis of how you grow Imagen, is that, that is something that you won't bend on?
Yeah, look, it's part of the thesis, right? So for us, we have these partners. They stay for a minimum of 5, hopefully 10 years. We don't really turn over partner doctors, right? So by having that superpower, it helps with our organic growth rates pretty significantly. We look for people that want to partner. People are looking to collect a check and then take off. Not for us. We'll totally recommend them to someone where they can get some value. Is there an opportunity to partner with doctors that say, hey, like I have, 2, 3, 4 years left, whatever that number may be. And, if we have a good transition plan or we got a good set of associates, we have this pathway to partnership program for our associates as an example, like we would consider it, but it's not necessarily what I'd call our bread and butter. But for us, like doctors are totally open with us around when they are going to retire because it's to their benefit, right? So we can take some long-term planning into account and make sure that practice and their patient base is well taken care of beyond the doctor retirement.
And speaking of long-term planning and wealth creation, because you're not a private equity held organization, there's no fund that was raised that now has a hold period where there's pressure to return value to the investors in a short period of time. Do you think that lends to you viewing things differently as you set kind of your vision and plans for the future because you don't have that pressure on you to make a transaction in a short period of time?
Yeah, 100%. We can make investment decisions differently, right? So, we can put capital equipment or whatever it may be like in practices and think about it as a more medium to long-term payoff because we're not trying to package this thing up and sell it in a couple of years. We think differently. We think about a company that is building to last, not building to sell. And that allows us, frankly, to, from my perspective, make better decisions for our partners and their patients. So it definitely is like long-term orientation. It is associated with all of our decisions.
For the doctors themselves, is the belief that will ultimately be a larger generation of wealth for them because of the compounding interest of the investment into the business over time? Or what is the explanation?
Yeah, correct. A few things. Like one, the practice is growing and they own a huge chunk of the practice. And obviously they make money off of the dentistry that they do. But every practice is an owner and Topco Imagen as well. And so as the value of the company increases, that investment continues to appreciate more and more. And so the idea is, and proving out so far, is that the value of the doctor's economics is larger, obviously, over time, and more so Imagen than not staying independent and then going with another group as well.
Yeah. And then for Topco, you get the benefit of the individual practices themselves being highly motivated for year over year growth and to continue to grow. So you don't need to simply grow by acquisition and kind of stacking EBITDA from a bunch more practices. You have alignment within your clinical teams to ensure that you're providing great care.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Very cool. So initially, when you grew and founded Imagen, you were doing it on a fragmented technology stack. At least from a practice management perspective, had to ask this question. And at some point, you all looked at your environment and made a decision that you wanted to evaluate solutions and make a change. I understand that's probably, in some cases, problematic for clinicians that were partnered at the outset without knowledge of a need to change in the future. I don't know how those conversations took place, but I'm just curious from your perspective, what are the things that kind of fell into place that ultimately led you to come to the decision to do standardization? And when you initially start the conversations and the partnership with clinical teams that don't expect it, how do you go about ensuring a smooth process moving forward?
Yeah, no, good question. Look, so I think earlier I talked about like the whole, there's a bunch of hypotheses and models and PowerPoint presentations and all that kind of stuff, right? And so I'd say one of the things that we got wrong, we'd be able to run this business by having some disparate systems and, essentially a data warehouse that can normalize data. And that just wasn't the case. And so it just got, more unruly as we grew, to do things like, close the books, recognize revenue effectively, run anything RCM related as an example. And it became pretty clear that we had to make a bit of a pivot. So, and, look, I was probably the most scared of the pivot, frankly, and because of what you just talked about, getting doctors and team members aligned. But we've been very thoughtful about it so far, and we are going to continue to be, of course. But we have the benefit of having partners and shareholders in this community. And so when you simply explain to them and you're completely transparent with them around here's where we are, here's what we're experiencing, and here's where we need to go and why, ultimately people are logical human beings and we're going to get it, right? And so now they become an advocate and help you do things like, okay, now we got to just bring the teams along and explain the why and do all that sort of stuff. And so there's no running from it. Like the process of migrating onto a single system that we've invested a lot of dollars, as you know, to get this right. We'll be able to pivot quickly. And frankly, like the business is going to be better because of it. And the shareholders are going to benefit, right? So if I were to go back in time, I would probably have made that decision on day one to normalize and standardize. But again, like when you're building a business to last, these are the types of things that you have to go do, right? And you see it in kind of even with private equity backed groups or the shift in the last couple of years. You can't just buy a bunch of businesses and acquire EBITDA and then sell it off anymore. Like that was what people were doing a few years ago. And that's just not happening. There's been fewer transitions in the space of transaction, in the space for a number of reasons. That's one of them because a lot of groups like didn't spend the time, energy, or money actually integrating the business properly. And so we are huge believers in the back office functions having some logical standardization associated with it. And it starts, frankly, with the DPMS. And that is the most important thing we are doing in 2025. And we're super happy to partner with you guys to get that done.
No, we're very excited about it too. It's interesting. We see, even in the private equity side, if you're private equity and you're acquiring a business, you hope that there are levers that you can pull to accelerate the value in that business to get a return on your investment in the future. You're not necessarily looking to buy the most perfect organization at that time where there's nothing to be added. And in the past, we would have folks that would make the argument, okay, well, if you're going to go to a cloud solution and a SaaS solution, well, now this is OpEx, it's not CapEx, it's going to have more of a negative impact on the EBITDA. But in reality, what we've seen is as organizations have been acquired by private equity, the new owners look at it and they view this as a value add that they can bring into the business is the consolidation of systems and the standardization. And there is no conversation about the CapEx, OpEx at that point. It's the increased efficiency and optimization that you get on the back end far outweighs any of that financial math that you'd be doing there on the front side.
You're able to make decisions quicker. It makes the operating teams' lives easier. It makes whether it be finance, accounting, RCM, et cetera, you're able to move quicker, move more accurately, have more confidence. And there's a bunch of reasons why it's done. And there's a lot of value that comes out.
You've been in dental for quite some time now. We just kind of went through what most people thought was challenging. It didn't look so for Imagen. You guys just kept cranking away. As we kind of move into the next few years, what are some of the things that make you bullish on the industry that you're excited about that just kind of either are a cause for hope or just things that you look at and go like, this is really a great space to be?
Yeah, I've always thought it's a great space and I continue to think that, the last couple of years have been hard for everybody, like us included, right? Like obviously we make a bunch of partner announcements and stuff, but I assure you it hasn't been easy to get through. But I think at the end of the day, again, like I've kind of drawn in this theme of built to last a little bit, but I think the last couple of years have really forced a lot of companies to look in the mirror and think about how they need to grow and what foundations they need to have in place. And ultimately, I think that the industry will get better as a result of some of the noise that's happened, which is really awesome. So I think there'll continue to be space for small, emerging, and medium-sized groups to thrive and build good businesses, over the next how long. Like, we were talking about, your event in Austin right before we started talking. Like, I think one of the biggest surprises for me, like walking into the space, was the amount of abundance from leaders of other DSOs and how much they share and how much the different companies actually care about each other. And so I look forward to learning off of people's experiences and them learning off of our experiences to continue to grow. So I think that's really exciting, at least for me personally, in the space. And then look, I think, everyone's been talking about AI for a little while. I'm curious to see how it shakes out. Like I still continue to think it's a little early for certain things. Like I see, AI being integrated into all these, smaller SaaS companies or even mid-sized SaaS companies, of course. I haven't quite seen the disruptor yet across the board. And, I have some curiosities and some hypotheses, but, I think some fun stuff is going to shake out over the next 12, 24 months that, really, really create some interesting change and scale opportunity for a lot of the businesses that are out there. But look, dental is a fairly stable space, right? Like I think the stat is gone down twice since World War II. And that was, I believe, 2020 and 2008 for like obvious reasons. And, it's a good industry to be in, and it's a grower and stable. And I think that we're going to continue to, invest in creating awesome patient outcomes as an industry as a whole.
So you mentioned Built to Last a couple of times, which is also happens to be a favorite book of mine, along with Good to Great, Jim Collins. We talked a little bit about some books that you mentioned Who earlier, but any books that you recommend to folks or any favorites that you've read over the years that have really kind of been guiding for you?
I think Who is like the company is really for us, like the framework for how we execute has really been based on that book, Who, and John Doerr's Measure What Matters, right? So to me, that's a huge one. There's others that are out there that I really like. Checklist Manifesto is a really good one. Good to Great, Built to Last, Tipping Point. But yeah, at the end of the day, like I'd say Measure What Matters is something that I probably read once a year. It's to kind of get the foundation reset. It allows me to think about the business differently as we evolve, just kind of rereading that.
And that's the story about Google and the kind of the introduction of OKRs for objective key results for ensuring that you can like keep organizational alignment over time with incredible transparency too, which aligns with kind of what you had shared earlier.
That's exactly right. The other one actually that comes to mind is high output management. It's old school.
That was Andy Jassy, CEO of Intel, or Andy. Oh, there we go. Yes, very cool. Yeah, that is an old school one. With everything going on with Intel today, I think about that book sometimes, and I go like, I wonder where things changed.
Yeah, I think it stands up for the most part, but yeah, I gotta reread it, and we should talk about that next time we talk.
Yeah, it would be a good one. I'll check it out. So no, hey, look, we'll wrap here in just a second. I guess maybe last question. I know one podcast that you're a fan of, but do you have any other podcasts other than our mutual All In pod that we both enjoy listening to that is something that you seek out?
All In is great. It's my weekly for sure. Founders is another one that I like a lot. Acquired is another one I like a lot. Lex Friedman, depending on kind of who's on there. Yeah, so like those are kind of like the main ones I circulate between. But I follow a whole bunch, and if I see a topic I like, I'll listen. So I typically try to go for like my weekends consist of like early morning like lawn walks or whatever, and on those walks I'll just like listen to like 2 or 3 hours of podcasts, and I'll really go anywhere, man. But All In is kind of like the must see every week for me. It has been since like episode 7, and it's been good.
Same thing. I look at what they've done there, and I go, it's really pretty incredible because I actually look forward to the Friday release so that I can listen to it. I'm like, oh, is that? And then when sometimes on the weeks where they're late releasing it or something else happens, I'm like, where is this? Like, this is supposed to be here.
Yeah, they messed up my routine last week. It showed up on Saturday, not Friday. I was like, what's going on? Yeah.
100%. So that's awesome. Anything that you're working on right now that you want to share about, or any initiatives that you all have? Are you guys planning on just continuing to grow like at this pace? Just anything in general that you want to share before we wrap up?
Yeah, no, look, I think although we're going really fast, at the end of the day, it's kind of a boring business, right? It's exciting, but we're focused. We're not trying to be something we're not. And it's partnering with new practices, integrating them well and welcoming them perfectly. And it's growing those practices. Like that's the business at the end of the day. And so it's more the same from that perspective. Our strategic priorities internally are the same every single year in terms of the headlines, in terms of bringing in new partners and onboarding them, of course, growing practices, scaling the business, and focusing on a high performance culture. It's those 4 all the time. And so the content underneath those headlines can often evolve. They do evolve, but that is what we're doing. And I would say that 2025, the theme of the business is going to be obviously, working with you guys and going to a symbol DPMS and continuing to make sure that this business foundation of it is very healthy to allow us to go from, 100 and change practices to, several hundred over the coming years.
Really enjoyed the conversation today, Rez. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. So thank you so much for joining the show.
Of course, man. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
The Dental Economist Show is brought to you by Planet DDS, home of Dental OS. To find out more about how cloud-based dental software by Planet DDS helps unleash dentists and their staff to focus on patient care, visit www.planetdds.com. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes by following wherever you listen to podcasts. And thank you for listening.